Welcome to the 8th episode in a Legendarium series about the life and reign of Edward Longshanks. In Part 8, Parliaments and Purges, we will talk about the peaceful years between Edward's conquest of Wales and the beginning of the war against Scotland. By the summer of 1284, Edward Longshanks of England was 45 years old. As a young man, he helped secure his father's unsteady hold on the throne. Afterwards, he led the Ninth Crusade, presided over legal reform, and conquered the neighboring princedoms of Wales. In his eyes, this proved that God blessed him and his reign. Yet as medieval people noted, fortune's wheel turns against the strong and the weak when it chooses. Edward's eldest surviving son and heir, Alfonso, had turned 10. His earlier toys, like a wooden castle and miniature siege engine, were exchanged for hawks, horses, and hounds. Prince Alfonso showed aptitude for the hunt and enthusiasm for his studies, leading one chronicler to call him the hope of knighthood. Yet on August 19, 1284, Prince Alfonso suddenly developed a terrible fever and died. His shaken but publicly stoic father buried him in Westminster Abbey. Alfonso's mother, Eleanor of Castile, had her son's heart preserved and asked that it be buried with her upon her death. This tragedy ensured that young Edward of Carnarvon, born only months before, became heir to the throne. He, of course, would become the ill-fated Edward II. King Edward coped with his grief by returning to newly conquered Wales. He toured the newly built castles in North Wales, including their crown jewel, Harlech. The year 1285 brought new meetings of Parliament, and one of King Edward's greatest legacies is the birth of the English Parliament as we know it. During his reign, the meetings became increasingly frequent, assembling on 46 occasions during his 35-year reign. This gave the nobles a chance to assemble, express their concerns, and for Edward to address them as best he could. By doing so, he ensured civil peace that eluded the kingdom during the reigns of his father and grandfather. These parliaments also passed new laws, most notably statutes requiring trial by jury and appointing justices of the peace throughout England. Yet an omen of trouble showed itself. On Easter Sunday, 1286, the king stood in an upper room of his tower when the floor suddenly fell away. The assembled company tumbled from 80 feet high. Some died by crushing, others suffered broken bones. 3 knights perished, while King Edward Longshanks emerged with a broken collarbone as he fell on a Gascon knight. Many saw the disaster as heaven sent, including Edward Longshanks. Seeking divine favor, King Edward announced that he would go on crusade again for the first time in 15 years. In Gascony, he met with an Aragonese embassy. They had a grand time holding jousts and exchanging exotic gifts like a wildcat and a lion, the latter of which killed one of King Edward's horses. While he made peace with his neighbor on the continent, King Edward failed to further a new crusade because of the recent death of the Pope. So he spent his time in Europe founding new towns to promote the wine and cheese trade in underdeveloped Gascony. Despite these successes, he grew weary of waiting for the Pope to help fund his crusade, and so King Edward went home. The 10th Crusade never materialized. He returned home to England with his royal power at its height and the kingdom still at peace. Yet during this time, King Edward I would sully his legacy with an infamous act against England's Jews. Jews first came to England after the Norman conquest in 1066, and by Edward's time they numbered 3,000. Throughout the 13th century, English Jews faced rapidly escalating prejudice, being scapegoated or wrongly accused of terrible crimes. riots became more common, during which Christians destroyed their property and even murdered them. Easter became an especially common date for such riots. As early as 1275, King Edward passed laws forbidding Jews from owning land and seizing their inheritances before they could go to sons. After these laws impoverished England's Jews, they ceased to be useful to King Edward I as a source of taxes. During the 1289 Parliament, lesser landowners complained to Edward Longshanks of debts owed to Jewish moneylenders. So in 1290, King Edward banished them from his kingdom completely. In one infamous crime, a group of desperate English Jews sold all they had to charter passage out of Edward's kingdom. The captain, having fattened his purse at their tragic expense, then forced the passengers onto a tidal island that appeared above the waves. For now, he mocked them, challenging them to part the water as Moses had. All the people trapped on the tidal island drowned once the tide came in. Having seized his Jewish subjects' cash and cleared debts, Edward now looked for a way to use his windfall. Yet as the expulsion proceeded, King Edward suffered his own tragedy. In autumn 1290, news arrived that Margaret of Norway, the heiress of Scotland, had died. The royal couple traveled north. During the journey, Eleanor suffered a terrible fever. They stopped in Nottinghamshire as the Queen's fever worsened, and it became clear that her sickbed would be her deathbed. Queen Eleanor of Castile breathed her last with Edward at her bedside on November 28, 1290, aged 49. Having given Edward 15 children, she had been his constant companion, whether at war, in the palace, attending Parliament, or on crusade. In Lincoln, embalmers removed Eleanor's innards for burial there and to prevent decomposition when she returned to London. Eleanor's cortege took 12 days to reach London. Her remains, including her son's preserved heart, entered a marble tomb covered with carved moldings and shields, along with the arms of England and her homeland Castile. The normally stoic Edward I mourned deeply, writing letters to English churchmen asking for their prayers. For a time, he even withdrew into a monastery. Yet he also ordered the building of 12 elaborate stone crosses, known as the Eleanor crosses. 3 of these tall, highly ornamented monuments still stand. In their own time, they would have been painted and glazed. They mark the route of Eleanor's funeral procession between Lincoln and London. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.